Welcome to r/Nuclear Revenge, where a farmer gets revenge against the Ku Klux Klan. Our next story is from Pimp. This story comes from my grandpa, who knew this guy when he was growing up in the 1960s. We'll call this guy Henry. Henry was really old when this story took place. In New Mexico in the early 1960s, Henry owned a decent-sized ranch. Now, Henry was a badass. In his younger days, he fought in World War I and was rumored to be a gunfighter in the last days of the Wild West. He was also rumored to be associated with the Mafia in Chicago in the 1920s when he, quote, went to college. Henry had about 15 ranch hands and 3 sons. He had lots of cattle and land. His youngest son was in the army at this point, and his other sons had other jobs. A lot of his ranch hands were black, and some were refugees fleeing racial violence in the East at that time. So one evening, his ranch hands were attacked and beaten up, and a couple of his cows were killed by unknown attackers, but it was pretty obvious it was the KKK. After assessing the situation, Henry couldn't really do much, and the police were useless as the town police force was pretty much useless as it had like 2 guys. These attacks continued for a couple of weeks. No one was beat up, but some cows were killed and fences and stuff were destroyed. Henry received a note saying that he had to get rid of all his black workers by the end of the week, or they were going to burn down his ranch and kill everyone and everything. So Henry basically said, F this, and called his son, who just happened to be on leave. His son and a couple of his army buddies were on leave, and they pretty much had nothing else to do but come over. He was also really good friends with a biker gang in the area, whom he probably helped hide bodies on his land. So they came over and helped him prepare. No, Henry didn't want the police involved, as he was an old guy and did things the old-fashioned way. So he sent a couple of ranch hands over to town to get drunk and distract the police, and he would bail them out in the morning. Basically, it was 2 underpaid cops trying to contain the drunken madness in a bar in a small town in the middle of a New Mexico desert. So one night, the Klan pulled up ready to trash the place. The remaining ranch hands were having a bonfire and seemed completely oblivious to their impending doom. They were strapped, though. Henry had his son and his buddies and the bikers hidden in the barns and sheds ready to attack. When the KKK showed up, they had gasoline cans and some weapons. There were about 10 of them. Basically, the ranchers all acted drunk, until the bikers and the soldiers showed up and surrounded the KKK and pulled their guns out. Now, I don't know if anyone was killed or if he just gave them a good scare, but there hasn't been a single racial incident or animal murdered in that town since. Our next Reddit post is from Never Gonna Give You Up. Some years ago, I started working for a heavy industrial manufacturing company. I lucked out and got a great supervisor for a boss, Joe. The work was hard, working 12-hour days for 13 days in a row. Then I had Sunday off, then I was back for another 13 days. I was young and didn't mind. It helped my wife and I save up for a house. After about 6 months, Joe noticed I was picking up on the work pretty fast and promoted me to a group leader position. This came with a raise and increased responsibility that most other workers didn't want. Joe would put me in troubled groups in his department, and I would work on general improvements and figuring out the issues. This was a union shop, and the mentality was to just put in your hours. Don't work harder or smarter. Just do your time and don't kill the job, was the unspoken motto. After a few years, Joe was promoted to manager, and he brought me with him to his new department. While I wasn't a supervisor yet, I was supervisor in all but name. The supervisors loved it because they never had to leave the office, and I liked it because it was a good learning experience. I made a good reputation and got a lot of respect from workers and from management. Eventually, Joe's areas were doing so well that he was promoted to plant manager. As before, he wanted to promote me with him, this time to the supervisor spot. We talked at length about this because at the time the only available supervisor spot was working under Karen. Karen was female, a minority, and a member of the LGBTQ community. She was the poster child on the company's website of the inclusiveness of the workplace. Literally, her face was the one they used. She was also a freshly minted manager, and Joe was not confident in her abilities. But me being the plucky go-getter with a can-do attitude, I decided to take the position. I had to interview with Karen and got to meet some of her supervisors. They were very quiet and reserved. Once I was promoted, I worked in tandem with another supervisor, Chris. Chris was young, had one small child, and his wife was pregnant and a stay-at-home mom. During the first week, everything was going well. I was learning all the employees' names, getting to know the process, and getting my feeling for the area. During the second week, Chris's wife went into labor and she had a hard time with it. Chris went on paternity leave for 6 weeks, and I was tossed into the deep end in charge of the whole area solo, overseeing 60 employees. I was barely treading water, but I was doing my best. When I would ask Karen for guidance or assistance, she would scoff like it was beneath her and tell me, "If I have to do your job, then I don't need you." So I gritted my teeth and worked my tail off. My wife got me a smartwatch, and I was averaging 25,000 steps a day trying to keep everything running. We were holding our own, and employees all did what they could to help as the situation wasn't ideal for everyone. A few weeks in, I was reviewing some quality documents, and I noticed that one of the quality gates was not being followed. I emailed the info to the quality engineers, and they lost their mind. Basically, we were skipping a 4-hour-long step on a part that took 20 hours to make. Turns out, one of the reasons Karen got promoted was because she was running her department so efficiently. Then it came to light that she was so efficient because she skipped the quality process, cutting time by 20%. Except the engineers never signed off on this, and it caused massive damage control. The step that Karen cut had to be reinstated, and the parts that were never checked had to have warranty extensions. This caused the company to have egg on their face, and it made Karen look bad. During this time, Karen also became more vindictive. She would openly tell people she would never be fired and she could do whatever she wanted. She would walk the departments, and if she didn't like someone, she would make the supervisors write them up by the end of the day. She wanted us to find a reason, and if we didn't, she would take it out on the supervisors. For example, forcing the supervisors to stay late to do inventory or something else menial just because she could. She wouldn't let the supervisors make any decisions until she approved. So something like overtime had to wait for her approval, and she wouldn't respond until the end of the day, causing the departments to scramble. Then, if there weren't enough overtime employees to do the work, she would blame it on the supervisors. While the supervisors knew this wasn't right, we all needed our job and tried to do the best we could for Karen and the employees. We were mainly rodeo clowns to Karen being the bull. The first day Chris was back, him and I were both pulled into Karen's office. She started berating me on how poor of a job I was doing, making her look bad, and how I never came to her for help. This made me speechless because of the previous comments she made and the fact that supervisor work was beneath her. After the meeting, I was still a bit stunned, but I put it together that she was about to railroad me out of the company, and this was the first step. I called Joe and asked for a meeting that same day. When I got together with Joe, I started telling him about the things that were going on that he had no idea about. The harassment, the abuse, and Karen's vindictive nature. Ironically, while I was speaking with Joe, another supervisor called Joe to complain about Karen as well with the same grievances. Joe was stunned and said that he would speak with Karen, but he gave me carte blanche on any open spot in the company starting the next day. He really didn't want to lose me. I did a lateral transfer to a different department, and I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks later, I was leaving work, and Karen mentioned that I never turned in my laptop and phone to her. I told her that I didn't know that I had to, but I could give it to her tomorrow. She smirked and said that she would get it back soon enough. I didn't think too much of it at the time. Later, at the end of my performance review, my boss mentioned offhand that Karen tried to intervene in the review and get me fired, but Joe stepped in and squashed it. "Okay, Karen, now you pissed me off." After I left Karen's department, the turnover rate went through the roof. The supervisors were quitting at a rate of 1 every 3 months. Keep in mind, this is a legacy company that had multi-generations working. Fathers, mothers, sons, entire families. Some areas had 3 generations working side by side. And yet Karen was rolling over employees and supervisors like a steamroller. Working for her became the kiss of death. I casually mentioned to Joe about the turnover, and he told me he couldn't figure out what was going on. People were quitting without notice, and no one was doing exit interviews. I told Joe that Karen was writing people up to force them out. Then, when they would hand her the resignation letter or 2-week notice, she would tell them to leave immediately and throw away the letter. Then she would tell HR that the person quit on the spot, and that was the end of it. Joe told me that because of who she was and how high she was, the company wouldn't do anything to her until they had an airtight case. So I went to work. I took the supervisors working for Karen out drinking after work a few times a week, and I made sure that I had my hand on the pulse. If someone was quitting, I made sure they emailed their letter of resignation to Karen and CC'd Joe and HR, that they stayed for their exit interview, and that they called the company integrity hotline for good measure. Things were progressing well, and I had all the supervisors on board, except Chris. Chris really needed the job, and Karen was not writing him up. Through a stroke of luck, I found out Karen was lowballing his raises as a cost-saving measure. That was why she wasn't harassing him. When I told Chris, he was furious and wanted to quit on the spot. I encouraged him to speak with Joe before he leaves. Joe and Chris had a very productive meeting, and Chris decided to stay. Now, all the supervisors were on board. Joe brought in an HR bigwig from the headquarters in Kansas, and over the course of a week, each supervisor was sent in for an interview discreetly without Karen knowing. By the time the interviews were over, they had emails, texts, eyewitnesses, and a mountain of evidence. Despite everything, the company wanted to keep this quiet, so they brought in Karen and said they no longer needed her and offered a very generous severance package. Karen, being Karen, lost it on the HR people. She threatened to sue for discrimination and even called a lawyer. That's when the company pulled out the stack of evidence and rescinded the severance offer. After a few months, Karen found a new job as a plant manager in a different factory, and I found out where. I casually mentioned to the union reps at my factory where Karen was working and suggested they should maybe give the union at the other factory a call. Karen was fired within 3 months for employee harassment. Last I heard, she had to sell her house and move out of state to find a job. Our next Reddit post is from Denakius. Back in the winter of 2004, one of my friends, Victor, had an issue with bullying by Chad. I can't remember what the bullying was. I only remember the most epic and nuclear of reactions. Victor attempted suicide and spent weeks out of school before coming back. So this bullying led to a fistful of prescription pills and Victor getting his stomach pumped in the emergency room. Not your garden variety bullying. After months of me and my friends attempting to get revenge the right way, unsuccessfully, we planned our attack. And yes, I consider it an attack. Before anyone suggests, you could have shot his eye out. Yeah, we discussed that possibility. None of us cared if that was the outcome. Quite simply, we waited until Victor was documented to be working late one night. Our posse of 4 of us gathered up a bunch of paintball guns and equipment, forest camo and dark clothes, and jumped the bully in his driveway when he was getting home. We unloaded on him with paintballs, not caring if we shot his eyes out. By the end, he was rolling around covering his face while getting repeatedly shot point blank. We left a note under his windshield wipers. Next time, it'll be lead instead of paintballs. Leave Victor alone or you're dead. We also took a bunch of tire irons to his car and smashed the hell out of it. Good thing we were wearing full masks because of the little bits of glass flying everywhere. CSI being a thing and all. To keep us safe, we used a new pack of note cards sealed in plastic, we used gloves, and we used deliberately evil-looking handwriting that was less handwriting and more drawings with red ink. When the bully finally showed up at school, he looked like he had been sent through a meat grinder. He was absolutely covered in blue and black welts and had several bandages on quite a few spots where his skin had been broken. Needless to say, the cops were called on the incident, and there was a big thing in the morning where the cops went into every homeroom class and asked if anyone knew anything about it. The cops tried to guilt us into confessing having no clue who actually did it. They brought up stuff like, he could have lost his vision if his eyes had gotten hit. He may get permanent scars. We eventually saw pictures of the emergency room where his blood mixed with paintball paint from the welts being so numerous they were on top of each other. The guilt trip strategy to invoke a confession was a good one, except none of us actually felt guilty. Being the smartasses we were, we accused Victor, who, of course, was at work and had an alibi. After, the bully was jumpy and never the same. I straight up think that we gave him fairly moderate PTSD from the attack. Like, we seriously psychologically damaged him. After a few months, he moved and didn't tell anyone where. I think his parents just straight up left town with the kid, and he may or may not have graduated elsewhere. That was r/nuclear revenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.